I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Let me give this a little adjustment. So, hey, how's it going? Thank you for taking some time to join my session, to join other sessions throughout the day today. I know it's been a jam-packed agenda with different speakers, and I am one of the last few sessions between you and the rest of your evening and weekend. So I am excited today to chat about onboarding. It's a topic you've been hearing about throughout the day, but specifically how you can create self-service or self-guided, however you want to refer to it, onboarding that doesn't suck. The type of onboarding that goes beyond just your one-to-one human-driven onboarding programs as you think about scaling and growing that. So a quick intro of myself, and then I'll get right into it. I am Sherelle Merriman. I'm the head of customer success here at Arrows. I actually just started here a couple of weeks ago, but before joining Arrows, I was at Sprout Social, where I was a program manager for our onboarding and customer lifecycle programs. And before that, I was at Booking.com, where I helped develop and grow onboarding teams at pretty large scales. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been kind of dabbling in this onboarding customer lifecycle world. And I'm really excited to be at Arrows now, where we're actually building software to help companies move their customers through those onboarding phases and beyond more effectively. So it feels like it's come full circle, but yeah, I'm in charge of onboarding. I'm doing onboarding, and I'm working for a company that's now helping other people do onboarding. So needless to say, I'm pretty excited about onboarding. Okay. Before I go too deep into scaling and growing, and I'm going to preface with this is a lot. I'm happy to, chat and connect after this. But let's take a step back and really answer the question of why does onboarding even matter? The good news here is that if you're in this session, you likely already believe onboarding is important, but I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible and hopefully leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end so we can dive into some questions too. I am also, at the sake of career suicide potentially here, I'm going to do this presentation in emojis and with some animation. So let's see how this goes. But it kind of boils down to two things for me. So onboarding is, one, an opportunity to really celebrate new customers while making a good impression on yourself and on your product value. And two, and probably what most of you care most about, is revenue retention. Those are the two driving factors that I think make onboarding so important. So first, you have to make that good impression with the customer, right? It's like that first date. It's a time to actually celebrate because they have now agreed to work with you or your product or your service, and likely they have paid for that service. So it's a chance for you to start delivering on that value that has been promised in your sales cycle or on your marketing websites or however you're acquiring those prospects or new customers. It's also a really great time to reset or realign any mistaken expectations that customer has about your product or its capabilities, whether they were inferred or misunderstood. You really want to do that sooner than later. And then the second piece is revenue. I think more and more companies, more and more products and services out there are realizing how tied to revenue onboarding actually is. And good onboarding can actually help you prevent churn and save revenue. So customers, we all know, churn early in their life cycles if they don't understand the value that they're going to get from your product or your service. And that onboarding phase is what can allow you to teach your customers how to do those things you need them to do, but more importantly, in my opinion, why they should be doing those things. So the earlier they understand that why, the more likely they're going to be to keep growing their business with you. And that why should be a little bit personal. So why did that customer come to you in the first place? What problem do they have? What job are they trying to solve for? And how is your product or service going to be what helps them accomplish that job or the problem they set out to solve? That hits on that why. And if you can hit on that why and on that personal note, this is going to make that end user more inclined to go through your courses, go through your webinars, show up to the phone calls so that they can understand how you're going to solve for that why. You do that well, now you're beginning to prime them to grow with your business, and you, the onboarding org, become, or you get to act as that catalyst for potential growth down the line. So again, more revenue. Why am I harping on revenue so much here? Revenue is that value that your onboarding program can bring to your organization. So It's really important because as we get into these future slides and we think about scaling your onboarding model into self-service or self-guided, it requires a lot of collaboration cross-departmentally and cross-team. It requires buy-in from senior leadership. It requires prioritization from other departments. And it quite frankly requires budget. So knowing that your program is impacting the bottom line is going to get you more of that buy-in from your leadership, more appetite from other teams to get involved. And that's how you're going to really scale customer onboarding. Okay, where do you start? I'm also trying to keep an eye here on the questions or the chat section. So if you have questions, I'll try to answer them kind of as I go or get to them near the end here. But I want to take a step back. If you don't have any sort of onboarding program in place today, before you jump into self-guided pathways or beginning to scale, you'll want to take a quick step back. And even if you have an onboarding program already, think about how do you define what onboarding means for your company. So you want a definition that the whole organization can stand behind or at least be aware of and acknowledge. And sometimes that includes starting by like time boxing onboarding. We've seen this a lot where we talk about X amount of calls in X amount of days during the first few weeks of their life cycle. That's wonderful. Great place, great starting point. As that onboarding process begins to mature, the way you define it likely will optimize and grow with it. And keep this notion in mind because you do want your onboarding program to continuously evolve and grow. So you may start to also consider things like behaviors or actions customers are taking, or maybe that they aren't taking as part of how you define that holistic onboarding on top of completing those phone calls or attending certain webinars or courses you're putting out there. But the point being here is have a starting definition and set some sort of goal around your onboarding program. So let's say you want to, if you're a monthly subscription SaaS business, you want to onboard roughly 25 or 30% of your total monthly subs through this one-to-one onboarding pathway. When I say one-to-one, you're going to hear me say things like one-to-one, one-to-many. One-to-one to me is that human CSM, the onboarding rep, the implementation specialist, the services rep. Whoever is picking up that phone call and physically talking your customers through steps or through setup or through account integrations. Now, to go beyond that one-to-one world, you want to start figuring out how you're going to actually scale. So then maybe defining something like, let's onboard 100% of our customers. This is obviously very ambitious to set for a whole company, and we'll talk how you can begin to get there in some of these next slides. But having that big metric, that big ambitious goal at that high level will get buy-in and will get engagement organically from other companies. And it'll also force you to start thinking about, okay, what does success actually now look like for customers who are going through these pathways? Josh, let me pause there because that's a great question. How do you best prep your customers for onboarding to get the most of it? This really ties to handoffs and communication through that whole process. So starting with sales or pre-sales even, making sure that they are also aware of your onboarding process, of how many calls it is, how many days it is. So really setting those expectations and then making sure you meet those expectations that you promise. So if you tell someone an onboarding specialist is going to reach out in 2 days from the time you sign this contract, you better have an onboarding specialist ready to reach out in 2 days so that those expectations are met and then they can go further from there. And I can dig a little bit more into that question as I go too. So once you've kind of decided how to track and measure that onboarding progress, that's when you can begin using dashboards, trackers, Salesforce reports, Tableau, Redshift, however deep you go into that tracking, or even Google Sheets in a Google Doc or a piece of pen and paper. Point being, begin tracking something. You need some indicator of what data you're going to be tracking and where you're measuring that progress, because now you can also begin to spread the impact of that onboarding program more holistically. So if you begin to think holistically, things you'll want to also start thinking about is revenue retention, is revenue expansion. Are you improving churn rates at certain milestones in that customer journey, on top of completing those calls and that coursework you're putting out there? If done well, this tracking will be able to encompass all of these future onboarding pathways we're going to talk about here in a more unified way, still driving towards that end goal of reaching that 100% holistic onboarding. Obviously, a one-to-one call is going to hold more information than a 2-minute video, which might be one of your onboarding options. But those value realization moments that you're driving customers to should feel aligned, and those should be the end goals of these onboarding pathways. So for example, taking a step back, if you have a big cancellation problem after the first month of a customer subscription with you, start there. That's a great starting point. That can be your benchmark. And then as you build on your onboarding programs and as you scale them, see if you are impacting that first month churn rate. So if 60% of your customers were churning on day 30, of those going through your onboarding program, only 40% of them are churning. That is a big win. That's how you start sharing wins internally, because now you're driving revenue and you're driving retention, which are the end, likely the highest goals at the business. But that can get you going. Now, once you begin to get to that point where you're feeling good about this one-to-one world, that's when you can begin to scale. And you really want to learn from that one-to-one world. So whether you have that in place or not, if you don't have it in place, great. Spell out what the details for those steps are. Outline the first call. What are the discovery questions you're going to ask? Where are you going to capture the answers to those questions? This is all very important customer feedback that will help you also partner with product, partner with your sales folks to help them position the value earlier in the life cycle, to help product update features if needed based on what you're hearing in those moments. Again, it's that first impression I just talked about. It should be a celebratory moment. From there, you can determine what subsequent calls or meetings need to happen. What are you going to talk about on those? Is it features? Is it strategy? But start or be really smart with that time that you're physically getting customers or prospects on the phone with, and ask yourself the question of, what do I need these customers to do right now? And do they really need to see every single link and every single feature in your product? That is usually the mentality around one-to-one onboarding. That simply won't work as you begin to think about one-to-many or scalable or in-app or product-led opportunities, because you just can't physically jam all of that content, nor should you, into any one of those single interactions. So dig into those customers' whys again, and show them and highlight them how your product's going to give them value today, this moment on this call, while teaching them why they should come back, teaching them why they should leverage more of your tool or more of your service. But either way, point here is learn from that onboarding process and then start to determine which pieces could become things like webinars or on-demand content or even tutorials in your app. This is when you can start to introduce some of those self-guided pathways. This is also where a cross-functional collaborative team can become key. So back to that impact that revenue can show, that's what's going to excite this opportunity. So good onboarding is a company-wide effort. I've in the past, I've labeled these collaborative groups as things like the onboarding guild, the onboarding committee, the lifecycle guild. Regardless of what you want to call it, what this is a cross-functional collaborative team that makes sure you have the right stakeholders around the table so that you can craft this successful onboarding playbook, and so that these different departments can actually support when it comes to scaling those efforts. Because now, as we're talking about expanding onboarding, there's no way it's just held within the confines of your success team or your specific onboarding team. So whatever you want to call it, that core group should include roles like, if you have a designated onboarding program manager or the manager to those teams or whoever's leading those onboarding efforts, plus leaders and representatives from teams like customer success, from marketing, both product and customer marketing, from your product teams, from your design teams, from your sales teams, both pre-sales, growth sales, existing customer sales. These members should ideally also be members at proper levels in the organization. If you're in kind of that mid-stage startup world or bigger companies, you want ideally folks with director level or VP level titles to have some say here as well, because they're going to have the decision-making power for their teams and likely also the resources to actually contribute to building that program. So the more that program grows, the more likely you're all to also start including folks like data analysts, data scientists, engineers, your Salesforce teams. This becomes especially critical as you want to start to attribute successes of onboarding back to these individual pathways that you start to build out to really deem, is it or is it not working? I'll pause there because there's another question here. Regarding prepping your customers, maybe you could better expressed as prep CS for customer. Great point, Neil. Shouting out, making sure that individuals in that different buying decision or in that life cycle are also aware of who these folks are, when those introductions are coming. Is it the right product fit? Okay. So we talked a little bit about why onboarding. We talked a little bit how you want to learn and begin to think about scaling onboarding. Great. Now what? What are those pathways? So that foundation that we just talked about can bring you to this point of being able to consider the different onboarding pathways you can begin introducing. There's going to be a 100 different ways you can cut this. So I'm going to try to summarize it. And I think you all probably have a chance to explore these 4 categories of what I consider onboarding pathways. And I refer to them as guided and self-guided. So guided is, again, anywhere where there's a person involved, where they're physically moving people through specific steps, phone calls, emails, check-ins. Whether you're using tools or not behind the scenes there, it's still a person driving it. We talked a lot about here. So you're starting here, you're probably learning here. Now let's talk about how you get into programs that can help you actually scale. Webinars are a really, really strong starting point. I refer to them as one-to-many webinars. I call them one-to-many because it's often one host and they're servicing many people. These can still feel very engaging and collaborative if done well. So you're going to use one person. They're going to ideally be talking to multiple customers. So maybe it's customers who you have deemed a segment where they might not qualify for your one-to-one white glove onboarding, or you just don't have a huge onboarding team today, but you have enough resources to start a webinar. So this is how you can scale some of this context that lives in these one-to-one calls. And if you do them live and if you run them, a couple times a week and begin to think about what are the highlights from those calls and turn those into 20 to 30 minute type webinars and dive deeper into a specific topic. Again, those topics should be the ones that are high value and are driving retention and are driving product adoption within your tool or solving those main customers' pains. Start there. Get customers going into those webinars. You'll start to also collect data of what type of content are customers even interested in. That's your registrations. What types of customers are really engaging with, what type of content customers are really engaging with. That's the actual attendance to those webinars. And you're also collecting customer information. So you're getting emails, you're getting questions, you're potentially sending surveys after the webinars. Another great tip here is adding a co-host. So adding a co-host, if you have the resources to these webinars, now you have someone who can actually get behind that live chat as well. So in real time, starting to engage with some of those customers. And if you run them often enough, you're not going to have a ton of people in any one session. They will disperse across the different sessions you offer. So it is a really easy way to start scaling education while still making it feel like there's some personal touch involved here. Webinars can also become recorded versions. So as you think about expanding, let's say internationally, or you want to start offering education in different time zones where you maybe don't have live humans sitting there. Now you have recorded versions of these webinars that I'll touch on in another piece in a second, but you might be able to house them in a learning management system or your own servers. So now you can continue to have that content in the world. And then from there, you can build complexity. So you have beginning customers, you have those advanced customers, you have the expert loyalist customers who have been with you for a couple years. You can keep educating them and keep offering value by building on this webinar process by adding layers of complexity. And again, this prevents you from trying to jam pack everything into any one of those individual interactions. Which brings me to LMSs or learning management systems. There's a ton out there that you can partner with. I've used ones like SkillJar in the past, but they are exactly what they sound like. They manage your educational content or learning centers. They can be places where you house these live webinars. You can have those recorded versions I was talking about living in here. From there, what you want to start doing is now, you can imagine if you're recording 30-minute webinars, they might get outdated pretty quickly. This is where you can start to branch off and curate smaller and digestible videos. So now we're talking 2 to 5 minute clips that are really driving customers to those value realization moments we need them to achieve. And you have information from the webinars and from the one-to-one calls as what content customers are engaging with. If you're partnering with your data and your product teams, they can tell you what your customers are or aren't doing based on user behavior or clicks. And then you can use those 2 to 5 minute videos and prioritize the most important actions you need customers to take and build quick tidbits of videos off of that. And the last thing I'll touch on in kind of this learning management world is your help centers. Most companies do have some sort of FAQ or help center or guidelines on even their own brand.com website. And this is often supported and ran by support teams in the business. So make sure you're also communicating with those teams and make sure they're part of that onboarding guild or collaborative group. Because what you want is that company-wide approach to onboarding. And what you also want is if you're telling a customer how to do something and then they go look at a help center article, that better be the same exact message. Otherwise, again, you're going to lose that customer and you're going to lose that opportunity to provide them value on something they were actually after. And then we can get to kind of this term that now is floating around, which is product-led or in-app onboarding. But this is the notion that the tool itself is going to convey to customers how to reach that value realization point. Caveat, if there are any product designers in here, I apologize, but sometimes tools might not be as intuitive as you think they are or you think they were designed. So you might need some modules or pop-ups or videos to appear in the app. And again, those things should be driving towards the same things those 2 to 5 minute videos are driving towards the same thing those webinars are driving towards the same thing you're trying to drive conversations with customers to go take action on. But what you want them to do is move customers through your app and get them to do the steps that, again, unlock value. So if someone needs to log in and authenticate some sort of profile or integration, and until they do that thing, they can't get value from your tool, then that better be your first pop-up or your first module versus sending them to an empty reporting dashboard just because that is a highlighted feature of your tool. So you can get them there, but take them through the steps as to why that dashboard would be of value. I've seen companies use cues, videos, pop-ups. There are, again, a ton of tools here as well that you can lay over your existing app if you're using software or SaaS. This can also really help with internal development and engineering time if you can't commit those types of resources. But point being, how do you get your product or your service adopted faster? So again, revenue retention, and how do you get them to do that quickly? So across all these 4 pathways, it's a lot of work. This can take months, this can take years, and that's okay. You're not gonna do it in a week. You're not gonna build it all overnight, and you're not gonna ideally jam all that content right away into that first interaction. So really aim for progress here, not perfection. And do keep in mind that onboarding, if you're doing it well, actually never stops. So you want to keep optimizing. You want to keep growing it. You want your products to grow as your customers do. But do work, again, if you have access to it, work with your data teams, work with your product teams, identify those highest value features and actions in your tool, because these will be the things that you're trying to drive customers to do. And then make sure your customers are doing those things. So regardless of which pathway they're going from, this is where that tracking becomes important. Are your customers doing those things? Are you now seeing that impact on churn at the 30-day mark that we were talking about earlier? If not, go optimize, go tweak, look at your content in these learning management systems, look at the webinar registrations. Are there topics that just don't seem interesting, or are people dropping off before the call is finished? If they are, odds are you're either conveying the wrong information or it's at the wrong time, or maybe it's unclear. So it's an opportunity to redesign there. And then start to really partner with those growth teams, those design teams. Think about that future expansion. You're going to have premium add-ons. You're going to add new users. Your customers hopefully grow and use more of your product or service. What's the ROI for these customers? Make sure that that is present and front and center in any of these pathways. So also figure out what you're not covering here and who will cover it. If that's something you need support from your success teams, if that's something you need support from your eventual support team. So what didn't you get to in these courses as you're building? You might eventually encompass all of that, but today, what aren't you getting to, and how can that be covered elsewhere? So all of that information begins to inform what needs to be covered in these pathways. And to my point earlier, if you're tracking all of this, you're going to quickly learn what is working and what's not working and where you have room to optimize. Okay, so onboarding is important. We've covered that. You can start small. I think I have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get through the slide. You can start small, add one of those pathways we talked about, and the more you learn, the more data you have, you can validate those learnings, and the faster you can optimize. So now that you're all ready and pumped up to go, and you're going to go scale onboarding to 100% of everything, here's some mistakes I've made and some pitfalls you can avoid, and hopefully some tips. So trying to pack too much content into any one interaction, whether that's a webinar, call, any piece of content, don't overwhelm yourself. Don't overwhelm your customers in those singular transactions. Give them tidbits of value so that they can hit that bigger goal. Having that set definition, having that set goal that you're working towards can really help you avoid overloading content because you're trying to tackle pieces of that as you go. Make sure your content's up to date. Don't just record these webinars and trainings I'm talking about and send them out and never look at them again. Your tool hopefully is developing, your design is developing, your program itself is developing. You might be exploring new customer use cases you didn't know before. So make sure that your content and your talk tracks are keeping up because this is your brand. This is that first, second, third, fourth impression you're making. Make it a good one. Make sure your content's up to date. Stay aligned. This is a tip. Stay aligned with those pathways you're creating and said differently with those stakeholders. So share momentum, share progress. It's important that you add more pathways as your program develops and do it in stages. So all of these pathways should be leading customers to that same end goal we talked about, whether they're using your tool, whether they're using your help center, whether you're watching recordings. Get them to solve that pain point they came there for. That's that why we were talking about, and make sure that the other people controlling these pathways internally or have a say in these pathways or supporting them are also aware and aligned and in line with where the goals are heading. And then lastly, this is a notion that we speak of a lot here at Arrows, and just that onboarding never ends. Keep going, aim for that progress, aim for optimizing it. This notion will help you feel better that you're not going to accomplish this all overnight, and that's okay. You're not going to build all these pathways overnight. That's okay. You'll add new features. You're going to add customers who have new users. Point persons might change on the other end of this. Your teams will grow, evolve. You'll hire internationally. All that to say, make sure your onboarding programs keep up with all of that. And that spans beyond usually just those first 30 days or handful of calls. So make sure that onboarding never ends. I have a minute left, and I see a question from Tatiana. Our company's data shows us that when we do one-to-one user onboarding, the adoption and engagement is about 85% versus 20 among those who receive one-to-many webinars. We are about to sign a contract for 20K new users. Do you have any tips on how such personalized onboarding can be scaled? Yeah, there's the notion of just capturing what customers' pain points or whys or jobs to be done are, and you can simplify that into a very small survey, even a question or two. So what is your product's core use and what is the problem it's trying to solve for, and what are your user personas? If you can better understand in those 20,000 customers that you're trying to scale to what some potential user personas are, or even like buckets of user personas there, then you can begin to build out maybe different swim lanes of webinars and more specifically target these users to get into one of those more segmented webinars or scalable versions of onboarding. You can also do group trainings. I've seen a lot of one-to-one group trainings for those individuals, but happy to keep chatting about that, Tatiana, if you want to get in touch outside of here. I believe that is my time, so I will stick around for a couple seconds if anyone wants to chat deeper. I believe there's a link from one guy where we can keep conversation going. So thank you all for the time. I think that is my time, and hope to hear from you soon. Have a great rest of your day.